I've always loved the Yu-Gi-Oh video games. They've always felt like a special, inexplicable type of game to me just because of their source material. How exactly do you make a video game based on an anime, based on a manga, based on a card game? It's kind of an interesting challenge, right? The obvious answer is to just make the game be the card game, a digital simulator basically. It makes sense. You mean you're letting Yu-Gi-Oh players play Yu-Gi-Oh on their console, their Game Boy, their PSP, whatever, and for the most part it works. Sure, sometimes the rules in the early games weren't exactly game accurate, like the fusion system in Forbidden Memories or the monster alignments in Dark Duel stories, but they generally played like you'd expect and a lot of them were beloved. For me personally, the Yu-Gi-Oh World Championship games on Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS were some of my favorites, and I had a few friends who swore by the Yu-Gi-Oh Tag Force games on PSP too. One cool thing we'd do back in the day was we'd actually hack the Yu-Gi-Oh Tag Force games to unlock all the cards and then use them for playtesting for like real life tournaments. That said though, some of the most memorable Yu-Gi-Oh games were ones like Yu-Gi-Oh! The Duelist of the Roses on PS2, where they basically just ditched the card game rules entirely in favor of something totally new and unique. I actually didn't even get to play this one very much as a kid since I didn't own a PS2, but I do remember owning the Falsebound Kingdom for Nintendo GameCube and eventually Wheelie Breakers on the Nintendo Wii. Even if the games had their quirks, these are all good examples of Yu-Gi-Oh working well in unfamiliar genres. But that's actually not the point of this video. Well, not really. What we're here to talk about today is the myriad of different canceled Yu-Gi-Oh video games. To be more specific, I'm talking about Yu-Gi-Oh games that were released, playable, and then just ended. As in, you can't play them anymore, at least not through normal means. The reason I made this video is basically because I was recently thinking about Yu-Gi-Oh! Cross Duel, the mobile live service game that came out a few years ago back in 2022 and then abruptly ended the next year. I've always been fascinated by the game's shaky launch and swift decline, and don't worry, we'll be talking about it a lot more later in this video. But it got me thinking, what are all of the lost or discontinued Yu-Gi-Oh! Video games? I did some digging and I was pretty surprised by what I found out, so in this video we're going to go through the history of each of the now discontinued Yu-Gi-Oh! Video games from sunrise to sunset. So our story begins all the way back in 2005 with a game I vaguely remember hearing about but never actually played myself, the rather simply named Yu-Gi-Oh! Online. Yu-Gi-Oh! Online was Konami's first major attempt to bring the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG into the digital world. Launched back in November 2005, it let duelists from all over the world battle each other, trade cards, and hang out in a virtual setting, all from their computer. And yes, this was a game you actually bought on a CD-ROM and then manually installed on your computer long before the convenience of Steam or eShops. To my knowledge, it was basically the very first digital Yu-Gi-Oh! Simulator. At its core, Yu-Gi-Oh! Online played just like the physical card game. You started off with a basic 40 to 60 card deck, and then, as you played, you earned more cards through dueling. Every single duel gave both players one card from a selected booster pack, and if you played a full best of 3 match, you'd get 3 cards instead. On paper, it's not a bad way to build up a collection, but I can't be the only person who thinks that this sounds grindy as hell, right? The duels followed the same structure we know from the tabletop game. 5 phases per turn, life points starting at 8,000, and the same mix of monsters, spells, and traps to outplay your opponent. For a lot of players, this was the first time you could really play real Yu-Gi-Oh! Against people online, so it's good that it actually reflected the real game at the time. Now here's where things got a little weird. Instead of just buying packs or cosmetics like most online games do today, Yu-Gi-Oh! Online used something called duel passes. You had to buy these cards, yes, physical scratch-off cards sold in stores, and each one came with a code that gave you a set number of duel points. Every time you played a duel, it cost 1 point. You were literally paying per duel. New accounts started with 10 duel passes, meaning you could basically have only 10 duels before you had to start paying. The basic physical card you'd buy in store gave you 30 points, 1 random in-game card, and 10 mileage, which was essentially a crafting material that you could use to make cards, though I don't know the exact conversion rate. There were also USB duel pass keys. These were effectively equivalent to buying 3 duel passes or 90 points. It was an actual USB device that was sold in retail stores like Toys R Us and Target. It worked like a basic USB flash drive with the information you needed to transfer the credits to your account. And apparently the 3 cards players could gain from this type of duel pass were chosen randomly from an exclusive set of 6 they actually advertised on the front. You could also just buy duel passes online within your account, which were equal to 150 points at once. Apparently they had to temporarily suspend this service at some point due to fraud, though I don't know all the specifics there. I was also curious to know how much real-world money a physical duel pass would cost back in the day, but sadly I couldn't find any specifics, even though I asked around. If anybody remembers though, please feel free to share with the class. That said, you can still find the original CD-ROMs, Dual Pass cards, and USB keys on eBay today, although I guess they probably don't work. This model probably made some good money for Konami, I'm sure, but I imagine a lot of players were not thrilled. It limited how much you could play unless you were constantly buying more passes, and it obviously gave an advantage to people who were just able to drop more cash, so not exactly a level playing field. Over time, Konami rolled out updates to keep the game fresh. The biggest revamp was called Duel Evolution in 2007, which was Yu-Gi-Oh! GX themed and added customizable avatars and let you explore familiar Yu-Gi-Oh! Locations like Domino City and Duel Academy. It was a cool way to make the game feel a little more alive and give players something to do between duels. Then came Yu-Gi-Oh! Online 3, Duel Accelerator in 2009, which was tied into the Yu-Gi-Oh! 5D's anime era. This version brought in synchro summoning, updated visuals, and more cards, of course. It was the most feature-rich version of the game, and it lasted until the whole thing finally shut down on September 30th, 2012. Even though it's long gone now, I imagine Yu-Gi-Oh! Online still holds a nostalgic value for the players who got to experience it. I'm still a little jealous I didn't get to experience it myself. It definitely sounds like it wasn't perfect, especially with the whole Dual Pass thing, but I'd still say it was ahead of its time in a lot of ways. And it proved Yu-Gi-Oh! Could work as a digital experience, even with all of the kind of complications of the TCG, although I guess there weren't that many at the time. But long story short, Yu-Gi-Oh! Online walked so future Yu-Gi-Oh! games could run. Yu-Gi-Oh! BAM was Konami's bold experiment to bring the world of dueling to the casual gaming crowd. It was a browser-based game that you could play on both Facebook, yes, think Farmville if any of you remember those days, and Congregate, a website that hosts a bunch of free online browser games. Konami published BAM, but they contracted Frima Studio to develop it. Now, Yu-Gi-Oh! BAM wasn't trying to be a faithful recreation of the TCG. I think instead it was trying to just reimagine the core mechanics into something that was faster and simpler and more social, designed to kind of emphasize the quick play sessions and mobile gameplay. At first glance, BAM looked like Yu-Gi-Oh!, but it played more like a streamlined battler. Each duel started with a 15-card deck and a 3-card hand. Players placed monsters and spells into 3 vertical channels and then hit the big BAM button in the middle to resolve everything at once. Spells activated first, followed by monsters battling based on their attack power. And of course, the goal is still to reduce your opponent's life points to 0. But your total life points were determined by the total life points stats of all the monster cards in the player's deck. There were no tribute summons, no chains, and no complex rulings. It was all about quick decisions and satisfying animations. The game even featured a crafting system where you could combine cards and resources to create new ones, adding a layer of progression and collection. The game included over 700 cards, 99 of which were exclusive to the crafting feature, and the majority of the cards had different effects compared to their TCG counterparts. I've heard the game basically described as a sort of rock, paper, scissors approach to Yu-Gi-Oh! BAM was free to play, but surprise, surprise, it leaned heavily on microtransactions. And like any good freemium game, it used multiple currencies, dual points that you could earn through certain quests, or of course just buying them, coins, of which I couldn't really figure out what these were for, I didn't actually play the game myself, and card pieces that were used to craft cards. Oh, and of course, like every Facebook game at the time, there was an energy system. Energy was required to play duels, and once it was depleted, you either waited for it to recharge or paid up. When the browser version shut down on September 30th, 2014, BAM actually lived on through its mobile counterpart, Yu-Gi-Oh! BAM Pocket. This version offered similar gameplay with some added features like a pro mode, which basically unlocked all the additional content for a fee, but even BAM Pocket eventually met the same fate, shutting down on September 9th, 2016. While BAM didn't really stick around, I do think it left its mark as one of the few Yu-Gi-Oh! Games that dared to break the mold. It wasn't about competitive depth, it was about accessibility, speed, and fun. I'm sure for many players it was a gateway into the Yu-Gi-Oh! Universe, and for others, just a nice nostalgic detour. You can even technically see some of the early parts of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links and the speed duel system here. Being on Facebook in the mid-2010s probably helped put it in front of a lot more eyes too. Like, I imagine this would have been a pretty popular game to play on a school or a library computer back in my day. Either way, BAM proved that even a simplified version of dueling could still pack some punch. Next up is Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Arena. This was Konami's 2014 browser-based attempt to bring the classic TCG experience to a wider audience. Built on Flash and playable directly through web browsers like Chrome or Firefox, Duel Arena aimed to be a lightweight, accessible platform for both newcomers and seasoned duelists. It was also visually defined by its distinctive chibi art style versions of characters and monsters from the anime, with huge heads and tiny bodies. Fun fact, Konami's actually reusing this style for some cards in the upcoming Battles of Legend set in the TCG today, so good to know that it wasn't lost completely. Unlike BAM, Duel Arena adhered pretty closely to the traditional Yu-Gi-Oh! Rule set. It offered a faithful simulation of the physical card game, and you could basically see it as a sort of successor to Yu-Gi-Oh! Online. Players could engage in duels against AI-controlled characters or just other players worldwide. The game featured a vast card pool, it had over 5,800 cards at launch, and it had plans to regularly update and include new ones. One of the game's notable features was the partner system. Players could recruit iconic characters from across the different Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime at the time, which I think would have been through Zexal at this point, as their partners, utilizing their decks in duels on a limited rental system. Stronger partners required in-game currency to unlock, which added a layer of progression and incentive for players to engage with the game's systems. Of course, Duel Arena operated on a free-to-play model, which was supplemented by, say it with me, microtransactions. The game introduced a dual currency system, dual points or DP, and coins. Dual points could be earned through gameplay, while coins were typically acquired via real money purchases. These currencies were used to buy booster packs, unlock partners, and access other in-game content. I'm sure you can imagine which one was easier to get. A significant aspect of the game's design was its energy system, which at this point I'm starting to realize is just kind of standard practice for this genre. They might have had a little thing for that. Players were allotted a limited number of duels per day, with energy replenishing over time. Completing certain challenges or purchasing energy refills with coins allowed for additional duels. This system aimed to balance gameplay pacing, but it was met with criticism for potentially hindering extended play sessions without monetary investment. Despite its ambitions, Duel Arena did face a lot of challenges in actually retaining a substantial player base. On March 27, 2015, less than a year after its launch, Konami officially shut down the game's servers, and the closure was part of a phased termination which included ending microtransaction services and partner recruitment features in the preceding months. And as you can see, the game's website is completely gone now too. While Duel Arena's lifespan was brief, it did probably serve as a stepping stone in Konami's exploration of digital TCG platforms. They learned some lessons from the mixed reception, and that likely informed the design and monetization strategies of games like Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links and Master Duel later on. If nothing else, this was the end of Yu-Gi-Oh! Games with an energy system, so good riddance. Moving on, we've got Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Generation. This was released basically in tandem with Duel Arena as Konami's attempt to bring the full Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG experience to mobile devices. So basically, Duel Arena was the browser Yu-Gi-Oh! Sim, and this was the mobile one. Released in late 2014 for iOS, Android, and Kindle Fire, it aimed to provide a comprehensive and accessible platform for both new and veteran duelists. Like Duel Arena, Duel Generation was a pretty faithful adaptation of the traditional TCG rules. Players could engage in both single-player and multiplayer duels. They had a pool of over 6,000 cards, and the game featured a structured campaign mode that let players just face off against iconic characters from the different Yu-Gi-Oh! Series with an actual story to go along with it, all the way up through Arc 5. Each victory in the campaign gave players new cards and deck recipes. The user interface was designed to be intuitive, with clear prompts and visual cues guiding players through complex game mechanics. You can start to see the first steps towards that visual style that eventually made its way to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, starting here in this game, and it made it a good tool for newcomers to learn the intricacies of a gradually complicating TCG. As you can guess by now, Duel Generation incorporated microtransactions to enhance the gaming experience. Players could purchase booster packs and premium decks using in-game currency or real money. While the game was apparently generous in providing cards through gameplay, acquiring specific higher tier cards often required monetary investment. The good news though, like I mentioned before, is this game didn't have an energy system, so players could just duel without any artificially imposed time restrictions. Thank goodness. But even though it was an all-around decent game, Duel Generation still faced challenges in maintaining long-term player engagement. The game lacked timely updates to include newer card mechanics, such as pendulum summoning not coming until 2017, which really limited its appeal to competitive players who would have still wanted to use the latest cards. Oh yeah, and it had the bright, shiny Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links to compete with too, so there was definitely some cannibalization going on. Fast forward a few years and Konami officially announced the game's retirement, with in-app purchases disabled on April 30th, 2020, and full service termination on September 30th of that year. That said, I've been told if you still have the game downloaded on a mobile device or an iPad or something, you can actually boot it up and play the single-player modes to this day. While it technically seems like just more of the same, I personally think Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Generation holds a special place in the franchise's digital history. It feels like it served as a bridge between the old style of Yu-Gi-Oh! Video games and the two modern simulators we have today in Duel Links and Master Duel. So, pour one out for Duel Generation. You did good, champ. And finally, that brings us to the most recent of the lost Yu-Gi-Oh! Games. One I actually got to play when it was around, and the inspiration for this entire video. Yu-Gi-Oh! Cross Duel. Where to start with this one? After the unfortunate demise of Duel Generation, which tried to follow the real card game, Konami decided to swing the pendulum and shake things up again with a new gameplay formula. Yu-Gi-Oh! Cross Duel launched globally on September 6th, 2022 for iOS and Android. It introduced what I believe was the first 4-player Yu-Gi-Oh! Format that combined elements of card battling, real-time strategy, and even a bit of tower defense. And for this section of the video, I actually reached out to an avid Yu-Gi-Oh! Cross Duel player, Wham Bam Duel, who still plays the game to this day. Who are you and what do you do with Yu-Gi-Oh! Cross Duel?
Greetings, I'm Wham Bam Duel, and in the Cross Duel community, I like to make custom cards. While I'm not too savvy on the coding part of everything, I actually did get one of my custom cards added to the game by those who are. I got Beast King Barbaros added to the game.
Cool, so thank you for joining me. I figured this would be fun to talk to somebody who still, plays Yu-Gi-Oh! Cross Duel and would just have more experience almost with the game's not only lifespan, but also sort of its post-life. So Cross Duel broke away from traditional one-on-one Yu-Gi-Oh! Gameplay by introducing a 4-player free-for-all format. Each player occupied a corner of a cross-shaped battlefield with multiple lanes connecting them to their opponents. Any monsters you summoned would automatically advance along these lines, engaging with any other monsters they met in battle, or directly attacking opponents' life points if they reached them. In that way, it kind of reminds me of Dungeon Dice monsters or even a hint of Duels of the Roses. Players have 4,000 life points and the game automatically concludes after 8 turns, with the player holding the most life points being declared the winner. Naturally, this setup encouraged strategic alliances and betrayals, since players could team up to take down a leading opponent or backstab allies for personal gain. How would you describe the core gameplay loop of Cross Duel to somebody who's just never really played it? Like, what does it do differently from just the other Yu-Gi-Oh! Games that a person would think about?
Cross Duel is hardly Yu-Gi-Oh! At all. What I always like to say is that Cross Duel played more like a board game with moving pieces in the form of cards. A big part of it was the cards had skill trees where you could put different effects on different cards, and super rare and ultra rare cards even had special skills exclusive to that card specifically. So it allowed for full customization of every single monster in the game, which I found extremely unique and ambitious and creative, and I kind of wish I got to see more of that with these other non-Yu-Gi-Oh! Games.
I think the real-time nature of the game added a real layer of unpredictability and chaos to the duels. Unlike most of the other Yu-Gi-Oh! Games we've covered in this video, Cross Duel offered several modes to cater to different playstyles and take advantage of the 4-player setting. Of course, you had your online ranked duels where 4 people competed to climb the ladder, but there were also tag duels, which were 2v2 battles that required coordination and synergy with a partner. And possibly the most interesting mode was the raid duels. This was actually a cooperative mode where 4 players teamed up to defeat a powerful boss monster that had a huge amount of life points. For instance, I remember leading up to the game's release, they were marketing a raid battle against a giant Rise of the Storm Monarch if they got a certain amount of early registrations for the game, which was pretty cool. Novel gameplay aside, I think one of Cross Duel's standout features was honestly just its impressive graphics. Every single monster in the game had a detailed 3D model and dynamic summoning sequences, and the characters were actual live 2D art, so the motion just felt more alive. Another little known part of this game is that you could duel and team up with characters from across the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime series, making them your partners and building relationships that even gave them new voice lines as they got more used to you. In that way, it felt like a lot of the old Yu-Gi-Oh! Tag Force games. Another unique feature was that players could customize their monsters by unlocking and assigning unique skills. So literally your number 39 Utopia or Red Dragon Archfiend would start the game out as a vanilla monster, but then you'd level it up and just add whatever cool abilities you wanted. This alone felt really new for Yu-Gi-Oh! And just kind of gave this new layer of personalization and strategy to deck building and let you turn your your boss monsters and really just all your monsters in your deck into your own personal army. But despite all its innovations, Cross Duel faced heavy criticism for its monetization model. The game featured a gacha system that made acquiring specific cards and characters challenging without pretty significant financial investments. Obviously, most players felt that the game leaned towards a pay-to-win structure, even more so than its contemporaries Master Duel and Duel Links at the time, which hindered its accessibility and long-term appeal. Personally speaking, I think just releasing around the same time as Master Duel really didn't do this game any favors. Now, I love Yu-Gi-Oh! As much as the next guy, but imagine being a fan and trying to keep up with 3 different games and their concurrent different in-game currencies. And of course, the game's departure from traditional Yu-Gi-Oh! Mechanics alienated some longtime fans. The simplified rules and real-time gameplay were innovative, but I don't think that they resonated with players who were seeking the depth and complexity of the classic TCG experience. Personally, I think this game might have just worked better as a 4-player Yu-Gi-Oh! Battle Royale using TCG rules, kind of enacting the whole chaos duel system that a lot of us liked as kids, or the duels like in Arc 5 where a player could just join in at random. Maybe just add in a tag duel system and you might have a pretty good product. But then, if that was the case, it probably would have just been an extra game mode in Master Duel anyways, so yeah, tough situation. What lessons do you think that Konami or whoever's developing these games really, what could they kind of learn from this whole arc of Cross Duel, that they can maybe take into the next game if they are to make one?
What I'm gonna say is, if you're gonna make a game that's Yu-Gi-Oh! But isn't Yu-Gi-Oh! And it just has the skin of Yu-Gi-Oh!, you need to be prepared for people to question it a lot at first. People are going to approach it almost intrinsically from a place of skepticism, like, oh, what is this? It's not Yu-Gi-Oh! But my Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards are here. What is this? But if you make the game play well, you make it available on as many platforms as possible, and then if you want it to be monetized, go for something more like Master Duel. I think out of all the Yu-Gi-Oh! Games that have a monetization model, Master Duel has the best one, because you can really get any card you want from just cracking 10 packs in Master Duel.
Despite its flashy presentation and creative mechanics, Yu-Gi-Oh! Cross Duel was short-lived, officially shutting down less than a year later. On March 28, 2023, Konami announced that Yu-Gi-Oh! Cross Duel would cease operations on September 4th of the same year. In the months leading up to its shutdown, Konami increased login bonuses and rewards and allowed players to enjoy the game's content fully before its closure. Despite its short lifespan, Cross Duel is remembered for its ambitious attempts to innovate within the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise. I think offering a unique and visually stunning experience that, while not enduring, did showcase the potential for creative reimaginings of classic Yu-Gi-Oh! Gameplay in the modern era. And as it happens, some devout fans like Wham Bam have managed to reverse engineer the game and run it on PC emulators. Although the PvP systems still aren't available at the moment, still though, they've managed to release patches that better balance the game and even make the ability to have custom cards. So if you're interested in trying out what's left of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cross Duel, I'll have a link to the Discord server in the video description. What can we learn from all these different lost Yu-Gi-Oh! Games? Well, for me, there's a few key takeaways. The first is that Yu-Gi-Oh! Obviously works well as an online simulator. Yu-Gi-Oh! Online proved that early on, and it actually lasted several years before its eventual decline, and I'd still argue that it was way ahead of its time back in 2005. I feel like the main issue was probably just the landscape of online card game sims at the time. People didn't really know Yu-Gi-Oh! Online existed, or at least I didn't when I was growing up, and having to buy your in-game currency in real life probably wasn't the best idea for retaining people, especially a younger audience. Monetization in general is a tough thing to handle, and the good news is that Master Duel at least seems to have finally found the right balance by making the game relatively easy to play without much investment at all. Speaking of monetization, I think the whole energy system that Konami liked to put into these early games was just not the way. That kind of thing certainly works for low-octane online games on Facebook or maybe some early mobile games, but Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a much deeper and more fulfilling game than, I don't know, Farmville. So people just want to be able to really sink their teeth in without any artificial limitations. Or at least having to pull for cards is still better than outright telling players they only get a certain amount of duels per day. The last point I want to touch on is the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh!'s more creative outings unfortunately don't seem to land, at least not in the live service front. I didn't play Yu-Gi-Oh! Bam myself, so I can't speak to how fun or not it was, but I think just hyper-simplifying Yu-Gi-Oh! And fundamentally changing it into a basic time sync mobile game isn't really the way. Cross Duel, on the other hand, really had something unique going for it. I just feel like the marketing wasn't really there though, and they never successfully managed to convey exactly what the game's appeal was to the people who might have cared. It's a shame too, because we got a lot of great Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime fan service and really beautiful production values, now largely lost to time. But of course, I want to know what you all think. How many of these Yu-Gi-Oh! Games did you play, and what were your experiences with them? What do you think went wrong, and how could Konami better approach things in the future? One new Yu-Gi-Oh! Project I'm still keeping a close eye on is the new Solid Vision Experiment, which is basically a VR demo that Konami's been showing off at a few of the different big worldwide Yu-Gi-Oh! Events. I actually made an entire video on that and the history of VR in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise, so if you want to check it out, you can find it right here.